Hi, welcome back to Wine and the Word. I'm Pastor Matthew, pastor of teaching young adults here at St. Andrew. We're glad that you are with us, whether you're in a coffee shop or at somebody's home or at a local pub. Watching this video and having some conversation. We're grateful that you're taking the time. This month at Wine and the Word, we're going to be talking about the book of Revelation, which is one of the most misunderstood, probably one of the most challenging, and maybe even the most controversial books in all of the Bible. We've been studying this together in a class called Bible Bookends, where we looked first at the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, and now we're studying the book of Revelation, the very last book of the Bible, and seeing where they connect and what they show us about who God is. So I want to give you just a little bit of information about this book, and it starts right from the very first chapter of Revelation, of how John, the writer of this book, describes the book of Revelation, because how he describes it helps us to read it. We can skip past all of those misinterpretations if we actually listen carefully and hear how John is describing this book. And he calls this book an apocalypse, and a letter, and a prophecy. So I'll give you a little bit of information about each of those. First, an apocalypse, which is this word that brings to mind all sorts of different things, right? You might think of the movie Mad Max. One of my favorites is Fury Road, the new one that came out a couple years back. A great action movie in this kind of post-apocalyptic sort of scenario, right? When everything has been destroyed and what's left over are these warring factions of people and this clamor to get water. Or you might think of the Hunger Games if you have kids or if you're into that literature of this kind of post-apocalyptic scenario. But apocalypse in the New Testament means something a little different. It's the very first book, or the very first word of the book of Revelation is apocalypsis in Greek. And what John says is this is the apocalypsis of Jesus Christ. And apocalypsis in Greek means to reveal, to show, to reveal something that's hidden or unknown that we didn't have access to before. So John is saying that this is revealing something of Jesus or from Jesus or about Jesus that we haven't heard before. The other thing about the word apocalypsis or an apocalypse or a revelation is that this uses really symbolic language. There are only two examples of this type of literature in the Bible that we have. The other one, we have the book of Revelation, which is one, and the other is the book of Daniel, this prophetic book from the Old Testament. And these use really symbolic, rich descriptions that are scary at times and beautiful at other times. But they are hard to understand because the symbolism is layered. It has some connections to politics that are going on at the time. It has some connections to other biblical literature, and even deeper, it has connections to truths that we know about ourselves and truths that we know about God. And it reaches far and wide in where it finds its examples for meaning. So this apocalypse uses this deeply symbolic language that we're drawn into. And John invites us into that interpretation. He invites us to wonder about how these symbols might be interacting with our own symbols. But most importantly, an apocalypse paints a totally different universe than what we live in. It imagines Jesus coming right now. And in the first chapter of Revelation, it says that Jesus is coming in on the clouds. In fact, John interrupts himself and says, "Look, Jesus is coming in on the clouds." And there's this vision of angels and of Jesus clothed in white and all of this strange language around it. But it's helping us imagine an alternate universe than we live in today. So it's an apocalypse. But second, it's also a letter. This letter is written to 7 churches who were in what we would now consider Turkey. And these 7 churches knew who John was. He was connected to these people and had probably written these people before or had been with these people, these communities gathered to worship and to pray together. And so these letters have direct advice and consolation and care for the issues of these 7 churches. But John uses, again, in symbolism, the number 7 and these 7 churches, and chooses them particularly to say that this is a message for all churches. So in each of these messages to 7 churches, we're hearing things that challenge us, and things that encourage us, and things that uplift us. And third, this is a book of prophecy. It's a prophecy that John is writing. And how we look at prophecy influences how we read this book. You might have heard or might have an understanding that prophecy predicts the future in some way. And prophecy will show something that'll happen sometime in the future, and it'll be proven, and that's what a good prophecy is something that proves the future. But the Apostle Paul has some strong care to say about that. In fact, he writes that prophets may predict the future. It may happen, and they may say something that then happens in the future, but also his advice is that false prophets may also predict the future, and that we shouldn't judge a prophet based on their ability to predict the future, but rather the way that they bring us back into faithfulness to God. So a prophet's role, rather than predicting the future, is to bring us back into faithfulness to God. So this book, which is an apocalypse, a letter, and a prophecy, helps shape how we read this strange book. We're not looking for a blueprint for the end of the world. We're not looking for specific symbols that will give us clues that if we just decode them in the right way, we'll figure out when the world is going to come to end and Jesus is going to save us and whisk us all up to heaven. Instead, this book is a vision of hope, a vision of promise, with words of challenge, yes, that cut us deep and open us up to see the grace that God has for us so that we can live into this vision for the future. I want to give you one of those visions of hope because you probably have some familiarity with the war and the challenging images and the ideas of Satan and Antichrist and the number of the beast and all of this stuff. We don't have time for that today. So instead, I want to give you one of these visions that you might not be as familiar with. And it comes in at the very end of Revelation, in chapter 21, where we see the new heaven and the new earth. In Revelation chapter 21, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away.'" This vision acknowledges the pain and the anguish and even the destruction that the people of Israel had faced as Jerusalem was demolished, the temple destroyed by the Romans, and yet says a new Jerusalem will be established, helping us to envision, even in the midst of war, even in the midst of famine, even in the midst of public discord, disagreement, fear-mongering, that God's hope for us is something vastly different. That God's hope for us is a new Jerusalem, a new city here on earth, a new public square where people are brought into God's hope, God's vision, God's life. The thing that marks Christians in the book of Revelation is this journey from death to new life. It's the journey of Jesus. It's the journey of the cross. The Apostle Paul says that if we're baptized into Christ's death, we are also baptized into Christ's resurrection. So that call of Christians to live in this in-between, coming from this vision of hope that John calls us into, of a new Jerusalem where mourning and crying and pain are no more, but that it's coming to us here on earth. This isn't a faraway hope and dream of some future, but it's right in front of us for us to step into. So my questions for you today as you talk with your group is, how can you think about this vision of hope Where are the clamors and the destruction? Where's the pain in your world, in your life, in your family, in your city, or in our country? And where is God calling us to envision this dream of hope? And how can we step into this vision that the book of Revelation helps us to imagine? You'll get a couple of questions to talk in your small groups, to think about how you might step into that vision together. Revelation doesn't have to be a scary book. It can give us hope. It can give us visions to step into, to dream about. It can give us images that we can imagine, even for politics, even for public life, even for the places that we can't imagine hope coming from. The book of Revelation gives us hope in exactly those spaces. Death to new life, new hope in impossible places. The book of Revelation is for us today. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you'll have a rich conversation.